Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for our now becoming a tradition, second annual Fireside Chat. I know a lot of you guys in this room have attended the last one. So just a kind of quick recap, the last year was the first time we'd ever did this. And what we used as an opportunity to do was like reflect on the year that passed, but also kind of preview for the year that we have coming up. So this is kind of turned into the equivalent of our Spotify wrap-up list, right? So when you look at the wrap-up list, you get to realize, oh yeah, there's a lot of big hits that actually came out this year. But also, you can kind of find some of those guilty pleasures. Looking at you, Sonny. Taylor Swift. But the good thing is, like, around the holiday season, around this time of year, everyone's always thinking and reflecting, right? So I think this helps bring into a lot of perspective about what we've accomplished over the year, but where we're going over the next little bit. And this person to my left, Scott Marcaccio, who's our co-founder and CEO of Myo Detox, has graciously joined us here tonight. So thank you for coming here.
Thanks for bringing me back.
No problem. I know when I think about 2024 from your perspective, you've had a lot of personal growth yourself. A couple of months ago, you got to welcome in your second daughter. How has that been and how's that changed your life?
Yeah. So I think the people that have kids will resonate with this, and if you don't have kids, it's something I think to really look forward to, which is I don't think there's a greater clarifying force than having kids. Like, it really creates this sense of every decision I now make is like casting down this line of what sort of future I want to build for my kids. And it's almost like this another sight or another sense that turns on once you have kids. So I felt that with my first daughter, but definitely second, there's like this sense of responsibility coming in. And I think I spoke about this at our offsite over the summer for anyone that was there. It was just, I've been reflecting a lot this year on what sort of world like I want my daughters to inherit. And I think that all of us are acutely feeling, especially after everything going on this year with geopolitics and elections and sort of all the craziness in the world, that there are things that as a collective, as a group, that we can actually bend the arc on or like improve in this world. So coming out of this year, I think that's how I feel. It's just like my purpose dial is turned up a lot. I think there's also a sense of paired with the family responsibility, just like our team is growing like massively. Like even we had our holiday party the other day here in Toronto, and just being able to go around and see so many new faces that I haven't met before, and how large the team's growing. It sort of goes hand in hand with the sense of like, what are we collectively building for the world? And then how is that going to impact our local communities? So I'm thinking a lot about, legacy, both personally, but also the company. So it's been an interesting year for that.
Yeah. Speaking about legacy, I know we've always talked about Myo actually being your very first child. What have you seen in terms of like growth and development here at Myo in 2024?
Yeah, this year's been really both fun and wildly challenging in all the right ways. So just to recap, we went from 15 locations at the start of the year. We opened 5 new clinics over the summer. At one point, we opened 3 locations within a 2-week span at the end of July, which for those of that you were involved, many of you were, was just a crazy whirlwind. But what I think I was most proud of this year is like nobody really broke a sweat around the openings. Like I think we all took it in stride. We knew what the job was and we showed up really well. But to sort of zoom out and look at where we were even 4 or 5 years ago, to even fathom opening 5 locations in a single year was sort of crazy. And not only did we do that, but Path, the clinic that we're sitting in right now, we also expanded it by 50%. So we sort of did 5.5 locations this year. So to me, like we really demonstrate some proof points that we can continue to take Myo into other communities that I think that we see, hundreds of opportunities to do so over time. More so than that, it's like one thing to build a clinic, but what about the lifeblood of the clinic, which is our front of house team and our clinicians. And I think watching this year, I know something you've been particularly proud of just how many new clinic directors and lead clinicians that we had step into leadership roles. So at the end of the day, we're going to do a lot of things in this business to grow it, but to watch our sort of rising stars have opportunities to continue to step up and take on more responsibility and like step into roles that, 2 or 3 years ago, they sort of had on their dream boards that like they knew they wanted to get to, but didn't have the training or the pathway to do that. Like at the end of the day, growth unlocks opportunities for a lot of us. And I think that's what this year has been, like a lot of people stepping into opportunities for the first time. And I think you and I both share this, like it's it's always really fulfilling to watch the shakiness when people get into a new role and the overwhelm of like, what did I sign up for? Like this either clinic director role or operations lead role, like this is a lot. And then after a few months, as they've stabilized, they really start to get it and they get into the rhythm. And when you watch somebody, get their footing and get their rhythm, it's super fulfilling. So I think that's what this year, if I had to like encapsulate it all, it's like we grew the footprint more than we ever have. I think we've set ourselves up to build momentum a lot in the years ahead, but more so, I think we've proved we've got more of a predictable system for growth to continue to move our rising stars into positions of all types, not just in clinic director or lead clinician roles, but our senior clinician program expanded markedly this year. We can speak later on like Evolve and Lit and some of the other things we're doing kind of earlier in the growth trajectory of anyone's career here at Mayo, but it's been a really fulfilling year on that side.
Yeah. I know it's really great to hear you speak about like the senior clinician offering. I think that's like something that I think is very unique to Mayo, but you also were touching on Evolve and Lit. One of my next questions for you was, with all the growth, and you spoke a lot about growth of our team members, how are we preparing them to move into the positions that they want to get into? And how do you see Mayo doing this in the future?
Yeah, it's something we've thought about a lot, because I think what happens, if I were to generalize the industry of therapy, what happens is an opening comes up really last minute for, let's use a clinic director role as an example. Somebody gets thrown in it, they show up day one at their job, and there is really not a lot of standardized or formalized training, right? How do you actually become a great clinic director? How do you become a great manager, a leader? Something we've all talked about before is like, being a great leader is a completely different thing than being a great manager, right? Being a manager is such a skill set, and a leader, there's skills involved, but it's such a mindset as well. So I think what we've identified is that training has to happen much, much earlier on the curve for two reasons. One, so people can get psychologically ready what they're stepping into. And two, so that they actually truly understand what the job is that they're signing up for. And do you want to do this? Because we've also seen a lot of buyer's remorse in both within Mayo and in previous days when we weren't doing this well, but also like generally we've seen this a lot anecdotally in the industry, which is people sign up for a role because they think that is the only way for them to progress in their career. And then, especially when you take a great technician, like a great clinician, managing a group of great clinicians is a totally different day-to-day experience than actually being a great clinician yourself. So sometimes the thing that you found so much fulfillment in, all of a sudden becomes this thing that you can't actually progress in any further. So to kind of wind back to senior clinician and double click on that, that's one of the reasons that we've spent a lot of time on your senior clinician program the last few years, because what we've seen is that, again, speaking generally in the industry, a lot of folks get sort of forced down this business path to become a clinic director, because that's generally the only way to step forward into higher income and more upside potential. But the reality is, from what we've seen, only about 20% of clinicians like truly live and breathe the business. They really want to like learn about metrics and talk about KPIs and sort of dig into like what makes a clinic work at that scale, sort of at a clinic level. But the reality is a lot of folks feel that that is the only path to move forward. So our senior clinician program is about how do you actually have a path to what I'll call like mastery, right? How do you keep marching down this path? And because you are now an incredible clinician, it doesn't mean you're at the end of your career. You want to actually keep progressing there. So that program continues to get refined, but effectively our senior clinicians are sort of like our Navy SEALs within Mayo. Like people have gone through extensive training. There's peer panels to make sure that people are like clinically ready to sort of step in to sort of offering a little bit more of a holistic end-to-end experience for the clients. So that's been really cool to watch. I know you've been heavily involved in it.
Yeah.
How do you feel like it's evolved over the last 12 months this year?
Yeah, so I think we're just getting ready to complete our third cohort of bringing on senior clinicians, which I think is remarkable. The biggest thing that we want to be able to make sure is that our senior clinicians are able to deliver on the future-proof plan. Right? Like I know this is like something that we speak a lot about in our business, but we want to make sure that they are able to deliver it and deliver at the highest level. So the way that we make sure that they're ready to do this is we prepare them, we test them, we actually go through the process of like, hey, I need to see you walk us through a 20-session treatment plan from end to end. And the reason why we do that is not just to like make people feel uncomfortable, but we really want to hear their clinical rationale. We want to hear how you communicate with your clients, right? Because something that is part of our Mayo principles, if they don't understand it, they don't feel it, right? So that's like something that I think senior clinician has done a really great job at doing.
Yeah, it's been really cool to watch that program evolve. And then The other thing I would say, so sort of stepping away from just clinicians, our Evolve program and our Leader in Training program are sort of two separate things that I think most of you have been versed on, but just to kind of recap where we're at, our Evolve program is sort of our entry level into thinking more broadly about your career. And I think that a lot of folks that come to Mile, they really get introduced to these concepts of like having a growth mindset, having an internal locus of control, right? How do we actually control our destinies a little bit more than just letting the world take its course? And our Evolve program that is now led by actually two of our Evolve alumni, so shout out Keely and Shanna. It's been really cool to watch people. I think we're running 2 cohorts a year. Anyone in the company can both be nominated and apply for it. And we've just continued to see the majority of folks that come out of our Evolve program with sort of these toolkits of how to think about the world a little bit more broadly. The majority of them end up within a clinic level leadership role within the next 12 months. So that's been really cool to watch sort of like the continuation of that. Our Leader in Training program is really the next level of that. You don't have to be an Evolve to go into Lit, but what we've seen is there's a really nice continuity of concepts there. Our Leader in Training program is really the getting ready before you show up at your next job. So if you've raised your hand and said, hey, I want to be a clinic director one day, like what exactly is that? Like I see my clinic director doing great work and it looks really interesting to me. Leader in Training is really an opportunity to like go into the concepts in a much deeper level to understand like what does it mean to be a manager, a leader, job-specific training, just to understand like a bit more behind the curtain. What does a CD's day-to-day look like? What does a lead clinician's day-to-day look like? What does an OL's or operations lead's day-to-day look like? And it's an opportunity, again, to avoid the buyer's remorse or to start to feel even more conviction that this is a path that you might want to go down one day. So to your point, it's just, I think there's an ecosystem, sort of a holistic journey that we are building out. We have built out, and now we're just continuing to refine it for anyone. Like if you're coming in as a brand new grad clinician or you're coming in as an experienced operator in any role, how do we actually take you through a journey that sets you up for success wherever you want to go in Myo? So yeah, big shout out to L&D team. I know they're like tirelessly working on continuing to refine this, and also just like everyone in the room. I think the feedback mechanisms we put in place around these programs to make sure like we're post-morteming every cohort, like what worked, what didn't work, how do we keep refining it? I think that's like core to just how we build our business here at Myo. Like we constantly have to throw out what doesn't work and continue to double down on what is working. And I think that those programs have come a long way in the last few years. So.
Yeah, and also to touch on that, I think something that else has been really nice is to see our MELSP program and now Brianna kind of step in to take over the leadership and like take it off Kev's hand. So that's also been like really nice to witness and see as well.
Totally. So just to speak to that for a minute. So our Myo Detox Emerging Leaders Scholarship Program was actually a sort of birth during Black Lives Matter and COVID, and that summer of 2020 when there was a lot of change going on in the world and a lot of reckoning of how do we kind of as a collective continue to create more equality in the world. And I think that finding a program that has continued to just build on itself every single year, that's been super fulfilling. So for folks at home that don't know, this is a program that every year we sponsor a number of students who are physiotherapy or chiropractic or massage therapists as well, massage therapy students, both with a financial stipend for their schooling, but we also take them through a 6-month mentorship journey where they get paired with a clinician at Myo for mentorship to sort of prepare them for what life will be like after school and how do they continue to sort of get ready to come out of school with their own style and their own vision of what they want for their career. I think I can speak for a lot of people in this room, including myself. Like when you're in school, the world feels very far away. I know when I was in school, I'm just focused on like, okay, get through this exam, get through this course. Like the guardrails are on, and all of a sudden you burst into the world and the guardrails completely dissolve. So we found that program to be so fulfilling on a number of fronts, but most importantly, like truly preparing folks for the real world and making sure that they're grounded in reality. Like we talk about everything from like clinical and clinical rationale all the way to, I do a module on financial literacy and how to think about money and how to think about your career in different stages. So that's been really cool to watch take on a life of its own. And just to your point, Brianna stepping in the new chairs. Nice to see like the, just something can continue to pass hands and grow and grow. So
yeah, I think it's been nice to see like our existing team members take on these programs, right? Speaking to LIT, speaking to Evolve, speaking to MELSP in general, right? I know you, myself, has spoken out candidly about building Myo for the next generation and having our team members do the things that we just kind of mentioned, right? And this is why I know we lead a lot with like openness about what we're doing here in the company. Can you speak about how transparency has come across this year at Mile?
For sure. So I think it's important, like actually zoom out from Mile for a second. I think a lot about what makes an institution fragile, or in Nassim Taleb's words, like anti-fragile or robust. And there's a lot of incredible examples of this in the world, both good and bad. So at the end of the day, a company is nothing more than a collective of people that have agreed to see the world the same way. And over time, that company can take on a life of its own. Like if I think of Nike today, like we were talking about lunch the other day, if I think of Nike, if every single person got fired from Nike today, there's still like an essence to Nike, right? And a new team could come in because that brand is so beautifully articulated. It sits on, whatever, 75 plus years of history, right, of that brand heritage. And people can come in and really understand, like, we know how to pick up the torch and keep running with it. In the early days of a company or a country or in any institution, it is so fragile, right? It's almost like if a few of the wrong people leave the company or it goes the wrong way, like it can fall and it can fail. And we see this a lot with countries or cities or states or including companies. So when it comes to Mile, we've thought a lot about like, how do we, a little crude, but we talked about like a hit by a bus test, right? Like if I got hit by a bus, I remember we did this at the offsite. We're like, no, you go off to space. Everyone didn't like the bus analogy, but I'm going to use it anyways. The reality is, like, if too much of the institutional knowledge and the power is set with a small group of leaders, it creates a very fragile institution. And I have been acutely aware of that, I think, from pretty early in Mile's days, like the need to, quote, institutionalize things. And there's a reason why when you look at a country like the USA, like there can be a different leadership in power every 4 years, and the continuity of the country continues, right? Because there are checks and balances, there's systems, there's controls, and it's nothing different than a company, right? Like we need all of that. We need a way we do things. We need SOPs. We need controls. We need people checking each other's work, right? We need a strong financial backbone and discipline. Like there's so many things that go into creating a stable institution, and whether that's a country or a company. So to your point on transparency, something we really adopted last year, but we have like really tripled down on this year, was this idea of working in public, right? So in Slack is one example. If I have to talk to Sabrina about something, instead of me just DMing her, I will actually ask her in relevant channels where 15 or 20 people or 100 people might be seeing our conversation. But in terms of reinforcing this idea of a hive mind, like our collective intelligence, it's really important that we are continuing to put information to be freely accessible. And something I take a lot of pride in actually is we continue to get a lot of feedback from new folks joining the company of like, they're so surprised how transparent the company is and just like how much information out there is just there. They're in a conversation like, whoa, in another company, like, this would be like, a boardroom only sort of situation. So like one recent example, and we will talk about New York in a minute, but something that's really exciting right now is we just signed our first lease for New York. So we're gonna be opening our first store in New York next year. We're going to talk about the significance and why that all matters. But from a transparency view, like 20 minutes after we officially signed the lease and got the I's dotted and the T's crossed, I posted it in our company-wide Slack. I'm like, not only did I post, but I posted the front page of the lease, and I posted the email from our broker saying like, it's done, like we're locked in. So I think it is really important that not only I set the example, but like anyone in a leadership position in Mile sets the example that we all need to move with as much transparency as possible. I think we're either close or just past about 400 team members on the team. And as I think about us going to 700 and 1,000, like it's just inevitable. We are going to continue to compound the growth here. Like we're at 20 clinics. It's a very straight path for us to keep going. The risk of us becoming siloed and making information non-accessible is high, because if we all don't commit to working in public, as there's this concept of entropy, like we're all going to just sort of sink to the lowest effort that we need to. And the lowest effort is, oh, I'll just DM Sabrina, or I'll text her, whatever. It's easy. But the reality is me taking that extra effort to say, I'm going to continue to reinforce work in public. I'm going to put this in the Slack channel. In that moment, it doesn't matter that much. Like, do people need that information? But it's more of a way that we do things. And to me, culture is nothing more than the way we do things here, right? And I think that collectively, I think a big thank you to all of you in the room, plus our team, like we are really hitting our stride with the consistency of how we show up and do things. Like, how do we win at Mio? Like, it is very clear working in public is one of our strengths, and also I think a huge differentiator. right? And we're very lucky. We've got a very like young tech savvy group and digitally native group, and I think that helps a lot for us to continue to use very modern tech to continue to make information freely accessible. So
appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do a big sky, eyes in the sky kind of question.
Yeah.
Next year's a 10-year anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about Myo over the past decade, what are some like standout points that you can think of right now?
Yeah, Myo is, I think back at so many inflection points where this company could have gone in so many different ways. For example, when we were in the early days, we thought Myo was going to be almost more like CrossFit. We were going to be more of like a method, and we're going to franchise it all out and do all this stuff. And there were so many things that like led us down this path that today in hindsight is so obvious of what we're building. But in the moment, it was walking through this fog of war that we just didn't know what the next step could look like or what the future would bring. So I can think back to so many times where the wrong decision would have cost the company everything. Like I remember there's one investor that was our first investor we were very close to bring on. We ended up not doing the deal purely on gut instinct, that it just felt wrong. The energy felt off. It turned out he was by far not the right investor. And in our early days, I think we were struggling so hard just to like for the next $1,000 to try to figure out like how are we going to fund our growth forward. We entertained discussions like that, but again, knowing where we are today, I look back and like, wow, that would have just taken us in a completely different direction, having the wrong voices around the table. So I look back and I'm just incredibly thankful. Like we've had so many things go our way, had a lot of the right people help us. And sometimes I look back and people went far out of their way to help us with no incentive to do so, but just I really believe there's a lot of amazing people in this world. And I think especially for folks that are further down the path of success or kind of in their careers, like for them to, at the time we started Myo, I think Vin just turned 30, I was in my mid 20s. And like we had just so many people that were willing to have coffee with us or to sit down with us, explain us simple things. And it's interesting, growing a company in Canada, we did have to spend a lot of time in the US to get those sort of influences, but we were lucky to have a lot of the right people that gave us a lot of warning signs of like, don't do this, or have you thought about this? And to your point on clinicians and senior clinicians, like you having to develop clinical rationale, I think that all of those discussions helped prime us to build the business rationale and start to learn what questions we need to be asking ourselves before we make decisions and where the footfalls were, where we're like very likely to make wrong decisions. So when I think back to the last 10 years, if I had to summarize it up, it's like a lot of hard work, a lot of lucky breaks, and a lot of really, really generous people that were incredibly, just gracious with their time, their knowledge, and their connections. So the list is very long of those sorts of people, but I also think that we're still such early days in the company. Like we're really just coming out of what I would consider like our teenage phase. Like we figured a lot of stuff out. I think we've got the rebellion mostly out of our system, but there's still a lot that we need to build as a company. So that's what I'm really looking forward to over the next 5 or 10 years is I think this year in particular has felt like the steadiest and most consistent pace of operating that we've had. I think we have a lot less crises in the company, especially coming out of COVID and things truly being settled now. So it really feels like a moment of change in a lot of ways.
Cool. I mean, I think there's a moment of appreciation for like Myo now is at 20 clinics. You have 350 plus people that work for the company now, right? That's like a big round of applause for everything that you guys have accomplished with so far.
It's us, yeah.
And a sustainable leadership team. So that's huge, right? You already brought this up, but NYC.
It's about time.
About time.
Yeah.
Why now? And what's the opportunity that lays there?
Yeah. So NYC is, it's been on our sites for a long time. Some of you know the story that we actually had like a fully negotiated lease right before COVID. Thank God we didn't sign it. We were supposed to sign it like March 13th or 14th or something of 2020, and we dodged a bullet because that would have been a stress I did not need in my life in. But New York, if I go back to LA, I think Kev, you asked me this in the founders interview of like, why LA? Like we're this Canadian company, why not just keep growing in Canada? My answer then was LA really sets a tone for health and wellness, right? No matter how many clinics we grow in Canada, at the end of the day, there are epicenters in the world that influence culture. And I think health and wellness from an LA perspective massively. So that made a lot of sense in 2018, 2019 when we decided to go there. New York is on a different level. New York is the international travel hub of the world. It is the press center of the world. And by and large, it's been really interesting the last 4 or 5 years watching a lot of this wave of longevity of people really thinking about how do they take care of their bodies and all the different concepts adjacent to that. Many of them don't open in LA now, they open in New York. And there is a sense of New York is becoming the discovery center of the world. So for many reasons, we built our network there really deeply over the last few years and feel a lot of conviction that Myo as a brand and as a service is like desperately needed and wanted there. So I think that the data really supports us going there, but just from a philosophical standpoint, like it really feels like the team is ready. I think that a big shout out to Kurt, our regional director in LA, like the last year has been absolutely record-breaking performance in LA. As a Canadian company, and really the first Canadian therapy company to ever successfully expand to the US, going to LA was a big bet. And the first 2 years, I was regretful of making the bet because it was incredibly painful and we burned a lot of money figuring it out. But again, that team's resiliency and the perseverance to just continue to tinker and finally get it. This last 2 years, I would say, but especially this last year, has given us a lot of conviction of what our opportunity is in the US. And we remain incredibly excited about Canada, but the reality is it is a relatively small market, right? There's, call it 35, 40 million people in Canada, and there's 10 times that in the US. So if we go back to Myo's vision and mission of global impact and really making sure that we are sort of changing the trajectory of both our industry and how people take care of their bodies around the world, we need to break out of Canada. And we have a first, I would say, entry point in the US with LA that gets us feeling really good about New York. And I think at the end of the day, cementing Myo as like a bi-coastal, it is the brand in the kind of broader health and recovery space. It's essential we get to New York. And I think that the team is more than ready. And more than that, I've also seen this with LA. Like when we kind of go into these frontier markets where we haven't been there before, like we're breaking new territory, it galvanizes the best out of us. Like I think we are pretty rebellious risk takers still by nature, and like that brings us to life a little bit. So I think New York to me is something the entire company can rally around. And I expect, and I think a lot of folks I've chatted with in Canada sort of like, okay, how do we expect this to impact a Vancouver or Calgary or Toronto? At the end of the day, New York being again, the largest press market in the world, we're expecting sort of global brand awareness around Myo. And I think there's an opportunity here to make sure that New York is not only a success in that local community, but really lifts all regions and cements Myo, continues to reinforce our differentiation and again, cements Myo as the brand, so.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's like amazing steps for us as a company. My last question for you is, Myo Detox as a company and as a brand has brought us so many opportunities. Like we're speaking about going to New York right now, right? I know you have a lot of exciting news in terms of the brand front. So do you mind sharing a little bit with us?
For sure. So yeah, happy to share that in spring of next year, we're gonna be revealing a totally new look and feel of the brand. And what's been a really interesting journey of actually seeing the brand come to life from day one to where it is today is it has served us so well on so many respects. I think that when we first started Myo, healthcare was very boring. It was very sterile. You go in clinics, everything's painted white, anatomy posters on the wall. Like it's so predictable 10 years ago when I walked in a clinic of what I was gonna see. So we took the opposite road of like, let's paint everything black. Let's bump Drake on the speakers. Let's just do something that is kind of contra to what the standard is. And that worked incredibly well for us. Over time, we're getting to a point of like, what got us here isn't gonna get us there. And what's been really fun and sometimes annoying, but as I say, imitation is the best form of flattery. We're seeing a lot of clinic owners, especially younger clinic owners, sort of directly rip off look, feel, verbiage, everything. So the reality is, every day we need to be waking up. I don't think anyone is ever gonna disrupt us. So it's so important that we take an innovator's mindset, which is that if we were gonna disrupt us today, how would we do it? And so much, I think, of what that comes back to is that post-COVID, the consumer landscape is shifting pretty dramatically, right? I think consumers are looking for more approachable brands, more inclusive brands, things that feel warmer, more human forward, all the things that you'll see in our new brand identity. And I think, on so many levels, we've spent a ton of time in the last year interviewing our clients, spending time with our clinicians, understanding what's working with our current brand on every level, in the clinics, visual identity, social strategy, content, at the end of the day, a brand is a promise performed consistently over time. And you can see that show up in what happens when you walk into a clinic, what people say. Or, Kate, you and I were talking about what's the exact words somebody says at Mile when you call in and you hear someone pick up the phone. So on every level, we're really reinventing ourselves before we get disrupted. And I think that there is a massive shift in the consumer landscape that you and I talk about all the time, which we're very tuned into, just given kind of how many conversations we have in any given week across our team. So incredibly excited to share it. I can't share too much right now, other than some of those kind of high level points of where we're taking it. But it is going to be probably a surprising departure for a lot of folks, where they think Mayo got here because the cool factor, and we were able to be this like interesting brand that was the cooler, sleeker brand. And again, what got us here isn't going to get us there. I think that strategy has worked incredibly well, and I think we'll always have a sense of that baked in. But at the end of the day, it's what is this company, what is this brand going to be as we move out of our teenage years and sort of establish who we're going to be. And I think one of the great joys of life is just being able to constantly reflect on our experiences, learn, reinvent ourselves. And to my earlier point on Nike, like Mayo as a brand has an essence, right? As a person, who is this brand becoming? And we've done a lot of work to make sure that I think there's an alignment between how we show up in a consistent way across every single touch point. So
cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
A lot of exciting things coming, right? So I know me and Scott can talk here for hours, but I want to throw it to you guys. If you guys have any questions that you want to ask him about 2024, 2025, I know he announced a lot of exciting things. So questions.
Can we talk about any sort of like scholarship or education for the administrative? Would there be an investment to their future?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so something we're thinking about a lot, especially with the new people and talent team growing, is really career pathing for every single role. And I think by nature of where we came from and what our core business is, like if our therapy isn't good, we're not going to have a lot of years of longevity in the company. And I think we're there now. Like I think we've really spent a lot of time on curriculum, investments in the clinical team, making it really clear what the pathing can look like, especially as all these various things. Kate and I were talking about it earlier today. It's like, how do you continue to make sure that at every single role in the administrative side, like it feels like there is a clear path, because we do attract a lot of ambitious people that aren't clinicians, but still want to be involved in the mission and having impact. And I can speak to it not as a clinician as well. Like I want that to be a real career path for folks. So there's a number of ideas we've spoken about, especially as people move into like an operations lead role or LFDA role, of how do we continue to give some sort of continuing development stipends, things like that. So yeah, it's definitely a conversation of how we can continue to support there. Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah.
Is there any other locations that you guys have your eyes on?
Yep. We are going to stay pretty tightly focused on the regions we're in the next few years, because I think every new region we open creates a lot of ambient noise, and there's a lot of things to manage when we open a new region. But we have, I think we've shared publicly, we've signed another lease in Park Royal in West Vancouver, which is sort of like, say, the most premium mall in sort of Western Canada. So we're really excited for that. That site's going to open probably in May. We signed another site in Manhattan Beach in Los Angeles, which will be our fourth there. So that should open at the end of next year. Continue to look for great spots. We might have some news to share in Toronto. Not quite, but soon, couple weeks.
Yeah, soon, hopefully.
But yeah, I think that there's so much momentum, and it's like back to growth and like sort of the optimal pacing of growth. What's really interesting, I think, is a lot of folks that even this year have seen us like open locations are like, oh, are we growing too quickly, or is this stretching the team too thin? And then immediately, like, there's a whole bunch of people that are like ready for new roles, like clinic directors or lead clinicians or everything. So it's like an interesting pacing of how do you pave the way before like the bus is driving down the road a little bit. And I think we're in a really good spot for next year. I would think beyond New York and LA, like definitely looking at some more markets in the US over the next few years, but nothing to announce officially yet. So, yeah.
Do you foresee any roadblocks or challenges in the New York market, whether it be, finding the right talent, building our brand there, just stuff like that?
Yeah, I think that when we went to LA, there was absolutely a sense of like, we didn't know what we didn't know. And a lot of those things were painful lessons along the way of us discovering that knowledge. I think New York feels like a much more informed bet. Like I think that generally we spend a lot more time in the market, talking to business owners, talking to people in the industry, talking to prospective hires. So it feels like we've almost been planting seeds there for 5 years, such that we've, I think, mostly gotten rid of the execution risk to pull this off. We feel really good about our founding clinic director there, which we can't name yet, but is someone that's going to be moving from our LA team, as well as a few other folks from our LA team that are originally from that area. So it's been really nice because they've really picked up the culture. The biggest mistake we've made in the past, LA included, is trying to start a new region without having sort of senior folks that have already like lived and breathed the culture of being able to go and help, fan the flames is really, really hard. So I think that's why it took LA some time to like really figure out its culture. Now that it's there, it's a lot easier to transmute to New York. So the short answer is like I lose a lot less sleep now thinking about like what can go wrong in New York and much more focused on like what can go right, because it's sort of all there for us. I think the market is absolutely ready. The talent's ready. We know how we're going to market. We know what consumer behavior looks like in the US. Like we know what pricing looks like, on and on, like down the list. So I think that at the end of the day, like going to LA humbled us in so many respects. And I think it has made us almost like overly paranoid for New York of like thinking about that stuff early and pre-morteming it. So time will tell though. Time will tell. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the question is, just with imitators and everyone kind of ripping Mayo's look off or feel off or verbiage off, like why I'm not worried about it. I think it's exactly what we just talked about. Like we are disrupting ourselves in a lot of respects. And I also think that there's such a momentum to this company. If you take an industry level view, you've got a couple big players, which are kind of old guard, private equity backed, really sleepy. Like they have their business model. It's typically all insurance driven and they're just rinse and repeat, buying up clinics. That's not to me our competitor. On the other side of the spectrum, you've got a lot of mom and pop clinics that have 1, 2, maybe a handful of locations, almost always stuck in a single region for many factors. It's very hard for these types of businesses to break out to a new region. So at the end of the day, like what I come back to is like our team is just unmatched. Like if I look at the talent density we have, both clinically and non-clinically, I just do not see this level of talent within the broader category. And at the end of the day, like tactics can be copied, but like a team and how we work together, how we operate, how we think about strategy, that is to me like impossible to compete with. And then number 2 is just like we're sort of standing on the heritage of 10 years of momentum. Like we have so much going for us, and even compared to a couple of years ago, like the way that we operate the business, we think about it, like there are cultural things that if I got kicked out of Mayo today and had to go like try to rebuild this, like I just couldn't do it. I have every single bit of insider knowledge, and like if I had to go tomorrow to like figure it out again, I could not do this. For a lot of reasons, a long list of reasons, but it gives me a lot of solace knowing that like I think that people are building some interesting businesses in the space, but I think what we're building specifically is just one of one. I think it's really hard to compete with what we're doing. I to date have just not seen any consumer first brand expand to multiple regions within the country, let alone like multiple countries, geographies. Every day we're turning down opportunities to expand internationally. Like the brand equity we've built, it just expands so much broader than anything we've actually done. And it's actually by note of our like discipline of saying no to a lot of opportunities, we're not expanding even quicker because we want to really preserve culture, make sure the clinical quality stays really tight. So I think we're just playing a really disciplined game, but we're playing our own game. Like I don't look at anyone as our direct competitor. I think we're really kind of forging our way. And I think at the end of the day, like us developing our own style and developing our own path, like how do you compete with something that is just completely authentic to what it is?
We spoke about the brand and the changes that are coming. Are there any plans to, because I know we're changing the color schemes and stuff over too, is there a plan to retrofit some of the existing locations? And if so, what can we expect?
Yeah, I can't speak too in depth to that. What we're going to be doing in Q1 next year, we have sort of this master plan is going to take sort of 18 months to roll out the new brand in very specific ways based on kind of priority, impact, resources available, and making sure we're not, I'd say, ripping off the Band-Aid too quickly. I think that we want to just take a very staged approach to how we're rolling it out. So there would definitely be changes over time. but we'll kind of detail those more in the new year. Yeah, good questions. Thank you.
Yeah, my question is actually a build on the brand refresh. Without going into too much detail, like I know even for myself, when I heard brand, it was just like a logo and like color scheme and new paints on there. Like, can you go deeper into how does the brand refresh lift up an FDA, a clinician? How does it set the team up for a success outside of obviously a new logo? Like, what does that mean?
Totally. So every brand has a basket of things that are sort of foundational to it. I think most importantly, the brand positioning, right? Why does this company exist? What's it hope to achieve? How's the world different for it having existed? So I think getting hyper clear on those foundational elements that then lead into a positioning statement, that then lead into the language, right? How do we speak about what we do? How do we merchandise our services? Like everyone in Canada today can say, we offer physiotherapy, chiropractic, massage therapy. That's great. So how do we, it's the same as, when Starbucks came on the scene, everyone was selling coffee. It was like so-and-so's coffee, so-and-so's coffee. And then Starbucks was the first brand. And all of a sudden, it was like a totally different way to think about coffee. Because not only did Starbucks promise a coffee, they promised this experience when you walked in the store. It smelled a certain way, it looked a certain way, you were greeted a certain way. You could walk out with that cup and feel a certain way. Like that, to me, was this incredibly cohesive brand experience. So I think when we go back to the foundation of our brand, look and feel and logos, like I actually think that's the thing that people think about the most, but I actually think messaging, positioning, strategy, right? Who is our consumer? So that was another big thing. Like we've done more consumer research in the last year than we've ever done. Like just breaking down like who is coming into Mayo? Like who is this brand speaking to? And how are they changing over time? And are the words that we use, are the photography direction that we use, is that actually speaking in service to that individual or that group of individuals? So there is, as you've been involved in it, like there is just so many pieces to this. And then the output, as we've like built out these customer archetypes, our positioning, our manifesto, right? Like if Mayo was a movie, a movie trailer, like what does that trailer sound like? We've even written that all out. So there's so much that goes into it. And then the output of visual identity, photography direction, a new logo, potentially changing the name a little bit. There's just so much that falls out from having actually like a sound brand strategy. So it's been really enlightening for me. Just, we did this first one in early Mayo days and founding history, and it was just like a much smaller process. And I think it was very visual identity heavy, logo heavy, like what a lot of people traditionally think about as brand. And this one has just been the most comprehensive end-to-end experience, which I've been like really grateful to be a part of, because I think it's opened my eyes to a lot more of how we bring the brand to life in every single touch point, both digitally, with a new website that we're kind of building from scratch right now, as well as every touch point in the clinic. Probably time for one or two more, and then we can wrap it up. Yeah.
Sounds for you.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool.
Learning and development, clinical development going into 2025. Like I know we're rolling out like the alignment course. Like can you speak more to the investment in clinical training, like what we hope to accomplish, why it matters?
Yeah. When you think about a lot about our product, it is a clinical product, right? What we do in our session, 95% of it is done by our clinicians, right? For like going through the whole history, we've really debated about like what is our product. And I think more than ever this year, we have more, no pun intended, alignment on like actually what we're trying to plan to do. So for the first time ever, we're gonna be shutting down all 20 of our clinics for a weekend to roll out what's called our alignment course. And the main reason we're doing this is to kind of train up our team like on what it looks like to have a phase 2 session here at Mayo. And speaking to phase 2, this is a part of our five phases of five phase model for Future Proof. So I think it's kind of like an exciting time to kind of see where we're going with it. And shout out to Gil over in Vancouver, who's now stepped into a clinical education role, who's helping to develop a lot of the content in conjunction with Nate out there, Nathan Vanderkoop, who's the head of L&D. So I think in 2025, you're going to be seeing a lot more courses being rolled out here at Mayo. I think we're going to be seeing a lot more structure when it comes to our open mentorships, our grand rounds, all the things that we're already trying to do to facilitate a lot of clinical development here. And it's part of our DNA, and we want to make sure that any clinician that comes to work here feels like they can become the best version of themselves, right? And we want to create all the structure that we can for them to have the resources to develop in that manner. But we also want to push them to go explore other ways of thinking, explore other courses, explore all that, and have an open mindset. But one thing I think that's super critical is our rollout of our competency frameworks. And we have a lot of our LCs already kind of going through that process. And what that allows us to do is provide feedback in a more tailored way in terms of like how your session's structured. What it requires for a lot of our team members is to have high self-awareness, have high ability to take feedback and be willing to implement that and bring it into your client sessions. So I think in a combination with rolling out the competency frameworks, rolling out more of these courses. So phase 2 will be going out January 25th and 26th company-wide. And then hopefully at the back end of the year, we're going to be rolling out our phase 3 course, which is motor control. So I think overall, when it comes to clinical development at Myo, we've already implemented a lot of things, but like 2025 is exciting.
Can I speak to that for a second?
Sure.
So what I love, we've talked about this a lot the last few months, which is in 2008, Starbucks was going through a really rocky time for a number of reasons. But at the end of the day, the leadership team came to this decision that they were going to close every single one. I think at the time they had about 7,300 stores for a half day to do basic espresso training. All right, let's teach every barista the back to basics. How do you pull a great shot? And they took a lot of heat in the stock market. And then within the next year, like everything skyrocketed. It was like a huge move for the company. And for us, we've recognized, like for us to actually really double down and show people like clinical excellence is like at the core of this company, it's going to take bold moves. So even that investment of like closing all the clinics for 2 days in Jan, I know that like gave our finance team heartburn, but at the end of the day, sorry, Adam. At the end of the day, we recognize like good therapy is good business. Like if we do not have the best clinicians who really get the memo, like to be at Myo, like our service to people, at the end of the day, like no matter what the clinics look like and feel like, if you come in and have an incredible experience with a clinician and you know that you feel taken care of and you're in like a professional's hands, that's really, really core to what we are. So just like Starbucks went back to basics, like for us, rolling out like deeply empirically backed courses that are vetted by our senior clinician team and so worked on for countless hours, like that is an investment we are making that we've identified as a huge gap in the industry. Like we have not seen great mentorship done at scale in our category before. And that's something we've really committed to. And that's why we've got, you know, multiple people full-time, senior clinicians on our learning and development team that literally all they do week in, week out is think about how do we raise the clinical IQ of our team members and make sure that they all have resources for success, and whether that's personalized mentorship in the clinic through our lead clinicians, or it's sort of these courses at scale that we really believe sort of represent the best learnings from kind of collective like hundreds of years of clinical expertise that collaborate on these courses. It's a really powerful thing. So yeah, kudos to you and the clinical team.
You know what it makes me think about? Like a lot of early days in Myo at the beginning, I know we spoke a lot about 10 years, right? I remember like going to City Place and like Vin just, hey, I'm going to host a workshop, and just like really diving into education, diving into culture. And just like, I remember we would spend like 3-4 hours just at City Place, like going over stuff, right? Yeah. And I think about like I know Rebecca's still here, John Chow's still here. Like a lot of that like is still like ingrained in our DNA, right? And I'm really excited to kind of see these things come more to fruition, because we want that to be a part of like every team member here, right?
Totally. Yeah, I think a lot of outsiders have this perception like Myo's the cool kids, but we're actually the geeky kids. It's like our value of never stop learning. Like even till today, like I've been business partners with Vin for like over 10 years, and like this guy just studies and studies and studies. And he's just like so fascinated with the knowledge of how the body works. And I think a lot of you have been exposed to some of his work with like Gary Ward this year. Like he just becomes obsessed with learning about a specific dimension of the body, and then just goes deeper than anyone on it. And I think that for those of you who've gotten to train with him and spend time with him, like that is so contagious. But that's sort of core to who we are and what we are, which is just obsessed with being the best. And it's out of a pursuit of knowledge and a discovery, which is, I think, really pure, versus like this egoic, like we're going to be the best. It's really, at the end of the day, like we're taking on all this knowledge so we can turn around and serve our communities in the ways that we know best. So yeah, it's a really special thing to be involved in every day.
Yeah.
So are we wrapped?
All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for spending tonight with us. Have a happy holiday season. We got a lot of exciting things going on. We got New York. We got a brand refresh, but everyone have a happy holiday season. And that's it.
Yeah. Thank you for a great
Have a
year.
good night.